4:52 a.m. Strait of Hormuz, western approach, 19 nautical miles from the Iranian coastline. An Iranian coastal defense battery just illuminated USS Stout with a targeting radar and held the lock for 6 seconds before the fire control solution was complete. Then the launcher arm elevated. The crew of the Stout, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, had been watching the battery on passive sensors for 11 minutes. They had seen the radar activate. They had seen the targeting data transfer to the launcher. They had watched the arm come up to firing elevation in real time, on a display that was telling them, in numbers and geometry, that a C-704 anti-ship missile was pointed at their ship, and the firing crew was ready to pull the trigger. The commanding officer had 40 seconds to decide what to do before the launch window closed. 40 seconds. Welcome to Navy Combat, USA. This is the morning Iranian Coastal Defense Forces brought a U.S. Navy destroyer to the edge of an engagement in the world's most critical maritime choke point. And the immediate air patrol deployment that changed the calculation before the first missile left the launcher. The C-704 is not the most powerful weapon in Iran's coastal defense inventory. It does not carry the largest warhead. It does not have the longest range. What it has is speed. Mach 0.85, sea skimming, radar guided, and numbers. Iran has deployed the C-704 in batteries along the northern coastline of the Strait of Hormuz in sufficient density that any vessel transiting the strait's navigable channel is within engagement range of at least 2 separate battery positions at any point during the transit. 2 batteries, simultaneously. That is the designed engagement geometry. A single Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, however capable, cannot simultaneously intercept saturation fire from 2 C-704 batteries firing in coordination. The ship's SM-2 inventory is finite. The phalanx engagement window against a supersonic sea-skimming weapon at close range is measured in seconds. The vertical launch system fires sequentially, not simultaneously. Iran built its coastal defense architecture around that limitation. The USS Stout's transit of the western approach to the Strait of Hormuz on the morning in question was not a routine freedom of navigation passage. It was a deliberate show of presence. Ordered by Fifth Fleet, following 72 hours of escalating Iranian rhetoric about American military operations in the Gulf region. The transit was designed to signal that the United States would not be deterred from operating in international waters by Iranian statements. The Iranians had been watching the Stout since it left Bahrain, not through covert collection, through a commercial maritime tracking service. The Stout's position had been updated on the tracking service every 6 minutes for the preceding 22 hours. The Iranian Coastal Defense Network knew where the Stout was. It knew where the Stout was going. It had calculated the exact point in the western approach channel where the ship would be within range of Battery Kilo 7, the specific installation on the Iranian coast that had activated its fire control system at 4:52 a.m. That point was not a surprise. It was a pre-planned engagement window. Battery Kilo 7 had first appeared in American intelligence databases 3 years before the incident, when satellite imagery detected construction activity on a rocky promontory on the Iranian coastline near Bandar-e-Laft. The construction was assessed as consistent with a coastal defense emplacement. The site's geometry, elevated position, clear line of sight, to the southern half of the strait's western approach channel, made its purpose unambiguous. The battery had been monitored continuously since its identification. Its radar emissions were cataloged. Its maintenance cycles were documented through changes in vehicle activity and personnel movement visible on overhead imagery. Its weapon systems, assessed as C-704 anti-ship missiles in a 4-round launcher configuration, had been confirmed through a combination of signals, intelligence, and imagery. The battery had activated its surveillance radar on 37 separate occasions in the preceding 18 months, each time correlating with the passage of a significant naval vessel through the western approach channel. 37 activations, 0 fire control locks, 0 launcher arm elevations. Until 4:52 a.m., the watch officer aboard the Stout, Lieutenant Commander Aaron Fisk, had been monitoring Battery Kilo 7's surveillance radar from the moment the ship entered the western approach. He had logged the activation at 4:41 a.m., 11 minutes before the fire control transition, and assessed it as consistent with pattern of life. Routine tracking. Expected. At 4:52 a.m., the emission signature changed from surveillance to fire control. Fisk recognized the change in 4 seconds. He called the captain, Commander James Eddington, and transmitted the contact report to 5th Fleet simultaneously. Eddington was on the bridge in 90 seconds. By the time he arrived, the launcher arm was elevated. He had 40 seconds before the window closed. The 40-second window is not an arbitrary number. It is derived from the C-704's pre-launch sequence requirements. After a fire control solution is complete and the launcher is elevated, the Iranian operating doctrine for the C-704 battery requires a final targeting update before the firing command is issued. That update takes between 30 and 50 seconds, depending on whether the target has maneuvered since the initial solution was calculated. The Stout had not maneuvered. It was holding its transit course at 14 knots, which meant the targeting update would be fast. Eddington looked at his tactical display. The fire control lock was solid. The launcher arm was up. The targeting data update indicator was cycling, visible on the Stout's electronic warfare display as a specific pulse pattern that American SIGINT had decoded from previous Iranian battery exercises. He had 3 realistic options in front of him. The first was to maneuver aggressively, increase speed, change course, breaking the current targeting solution and forcing the Iranian battery to reacquire. This was the same tactic that had worked against the Monterey's radar lock previously. The risk was that the maneuver itself could be interpreted as the precursor to an American offensive action, potentially accelerating rather than deterring an Iranian launch. The second option was to activate the Stout's electronic warfare suite in full jamming mode, attempting to disrupt the fire control radar's ability to complete the targeting update, degrading the solution quality below launch threshold. The risk? If the jamming failed, the battery would know the American response profile and adjust future targeting accordingly. The third option was to place the SM-2 launcher in pre-launch warm-up and transmit a direct warning to the battery on the Iranian naval emergency frequency, making unmistakably clear that the American ship was prepared to engage. The risk? If the Iranians interpreted this as preparation for a preemptive strike, it might accelerate the launch rather than deter it. Eddington chose options 2 and 3 simultaneously. The jamming suite went active at 41 seconds after the fire control lock was detected. The SM-2 pre-launch warm-up activated at 43 seconds. The warning transmission went out at 44 seconds. At 47 seconds, 4 seconds after the warning transmission, the launcher arm on Battery Kilo 7 came down. Not a launch, the arm came down. The fire control radar transitioned back to surveillance mode. The targeting update had not completed. Whether the jamming had degraded the solution, or whether the warning transmission had been the decisive factor, or whether the Iranian battery commander had made an independent decision to stand down, the intelligence assessment could not determine which variable had been decisive. What it could determine was that the arm had come down 7 seconds before the targeting update cycle would have completed. 7 seconds. At 5th Fleet headquarters, the contact report from the Stout had arrived at 4:52 a.m. and 31 seconds, 19 seconds, after Fisk triggered the transmission. The duty officer, Commander Maria Santos, read the report and immediately elevated it to Rear Admiral Howard Keane, who was in his early morning brief. Keane read the report in 40 seconds. He asked one question: what's the nearest available air asset? The answer came from the operations desk. 2 FA-18E Super Hornets from VFA-115, the Eagles, were currently airborne on a scheduled combat air patrol south of Bahrain, 88 nautical miles from the Stout's position. At maximum military power, they were 11 minutes away. The launcher arm had already come down by the time this conversation was happening. But Keane was not thinking about the next 40 seconds. He was thinking about the next 4 hours. The remaining transit time the Stout needed to complete its passage through the strait, and the fact that Battery Kilo 7 had just demonstrated it, would elevate its launcher against an American warship with a complete targeting solution. The battery had blinked. It might not blink twice. Keane ordered the two FA-18Es to proceed immediately to the strait at best speed and establish a combat air patrol directly over the Stout's transit track, visible, low, and close enough to the Iranian coast that Battery Kilo 7's crew would see them on radar within minutes of their arrival. He also directed USS Laboon, a second Arleigh Burke-class destroyer operating in the Gulf of Oman, to enter the strait behind the Stout and provide a second SM-2 battery in the engagement envelope. 2 destroyers, 2 airframes, over Battery Kilo 7's calculated line of sight. The geometry of deterrence was being reconstructed in real time. The 2 Super Hornets crossed into the Strait of Hormuz at 5:09 a.m., 17 minutes after the fire control lock had been detected. They descended to 2,000 feet over the western approach channel and established a racetrack CAPI pattern that took them within 14 nautical miles of the Iranian coastline on each northern pass. Each aircraft carried 2 AGM-88 HARM anti-radiation missiles, specifically because the HARM is a weapon that Iranian radar operators understand. It homes on radar emissions. It does not need a human operator to guide it once launched. An active fire control radar is a HARM magnet by design. Battery Kilo 7's surveillance radar, which had remained active in tracking mode since the fire control stand-down, went offline at 5:14 a.m., 5 minutes after the Hornets entered the strait. 5 minutes. The battery had been tracking every American vessel through the western approach for 11 months without interruption. It went offline within 5 minutes of 2 HARM-equipped aircraft arriving on station. The Stout continued its transit at 14 knots. At 5:47 a.m., as the destroyer passed the narrowest point of the approach channel, a second battery, designated Kilo 9 in the American intelligence database, located 12 nautical miles east of Kilo 7, activated its surveillance radar and began tracking the Stout. Fisk logged the contact, reported it, watched it. The battery tracked the ship for 19 minutes. Its launcher arm never moved. USS Stout completed its transit of the western approach channel at 7:22 a.m. and entered the open waters of the Persian Gulf. USS Laboon, following 6 nautical miles astern, completed its transit at 7:51 a.m. without incident. The 2 FA-18Es had remained on CAPI over the transit route for the full 2 hours and 18 minutes of the Stout's passage through the most exposed section of the approach. They had been refueled once in flight by a KC-135 tanker orbiting south of the strait. Battery Kilo 7's radar remained offline for the duration. Commander Eddington's post-transit report to 5th Fleet was filed at 8:14 a.m. The report documented the fire control lock, the timing of the stand-down, and the actions taken in the 47-second window between detection and stand-down. The report also documented something that had not been in the initial contact transmission. At the moment of the fire control lock, 4:52 a.m., the Stout's passive electronic intelligence collection system had detected a second emission source, briefly active for approximately 3 seconds, from a position approximately 6 nautical miles east of Battery Kilo 7. The emission profile was consistent with a second C-704 fire control radar, a second battery. If both batteries had been firing in coordination, the designed Iranian engagement doctrine, the Stout would have been absorbing intercept requirements from 2 separate inbound weapon tracks simultaneously. The second battery had activated for 3 seconds and then shut down. Whether the second battery's brief activation was a test, a malfunction, a coordination signal, or a stand-down order received before the system was fully operational, the intelligence assessment could not determine. What it could determine was that the Stout had, for approximately 3 seconds, at 4:52 a.m., been in the targeting envelope of 2 separate Iranian C-704 batteries simultaneously. The assessment was classified. It was not included in the unclassified summary distributed to Allied partners. The diplomatic response to the incident was handled entirely through back channels. Fifth Fleet's Public Affairs Office issued no statement. The State Department made no public comment. No press briefing was held. The incident did not appear in any official U.S. government communication. 3 days after the transit, a senior Navcent official participated in a scheduled deconfliction meeting with an Iranian counterpart through a third-country diplomatic intermediary. The meeting was one of a series of regular contacts that both sides maintained specifically to manage incidents in the Persian Gulf without public escalation. The American side raised the fire control lock. The Iranian side acknowledged that an equipment activation event had occurred during a training exercise near the strait. Equipment activation event? Training exercise. The American side noted that the event had included a complete targeting solution and launcher arm elevation, which were inconsistent with a passive training exercise. The Iranian side did not respond to that characterization. The American side made clear that future fire control locks against American warships would be treated as preparation for hostile action and responded to accordingly. The Iranian side noted that Iran reserved the right to monitor and respond to threatening military activities in the vicinity of Iranian territorial waters. The conversation ended without agreement and without escalation. Both sides had said what they needed to say. Neither side had done anything that required the other to formally respond. Battery Kilo 7's radar came back online 6 days after the incident. Satellite imagery showed that the battery had been modified during the offline period. A new vehicle was present at the site, consistent with an updated targeting system installation. The modification was assessed as an upgrade to the fire control radar's electronic countermeasures capability. Specifically, was resistance to jamming. The battery that had stood down when the Stout activated its jamming suite had spent 6 days becoming harder to jam. USS Laboon transited the Western Approach Channel again 22 days after the original incident as part of a follow-on presence operation. Battery Kilo 7 tracked the ship with its surveillance radar for the full transit. The fire control radar remained in standby. The launcher arm remained down. But the upgraded targeting system was active and recording data collection. The Iranians were learning the Laboon's electronic signature, its maneuvering patterns, its speed profile through the channel, building a more complete targeting solution for a time when the calculation was different. The 2 FA-18Es that had been on CAP during the Stout's transit were not available for the Laboon's transit. They were on a different tasking. A single Hornet flew a single pass over the strait during the Laboon's most exposed hour of transit, and then returned to base. Battery Kilo 7's launcher arm stayed down. But the tracking continued. It always continues. The larger story of what happened at 4:52 a.m. in the western approach to the Strait of Hormuz is not about the 47 seconds between the fire control lock and the stand down. It is about what those 47 seconds revealed. Iran's coastal defense architecture was not built to fire at every American ship that transits the strait. It was built to create a persistent threat, a credible, ready capability that forces every American commander transiting the strait to operate under the awareness that a launch is possible at any moment. That awareness shapes behavior. It constrains operations. It imposes cognitive load on crews that are already managing complex environments. The architecture works whether or not a missile is ever fired. The fire control lock against the Stout was not a failed attack. It was a signal, precisely controlled, deliberately applied, withdrawn before consequences became unavoidable. The message was clear to anyone reading the geometry. We had a targeting solution. The arm was up. We chose not to fire this time. This time, the response? 2 harm-equipped fighters over the strait, a second destroyer entering the channel, an electronic jamming suite degrading the fire control solution, was the correct response. It worked. The battery stood down. The transit completed without incident. But the response required assets, timing, and decision-making under a 47-second clock that left essentially no margin for error at any point in the sequence. And the battery came back online 6 days later, upgraded and harder to jam. The balance of capability in the Strait of Hormuz does not favor one side or the other permanently. It shifts. It adapts. It responds to each incident with an adjustment that makes the next incident more complex. At 4:52 a.m., the Stout's crew faced a fire control lock and a launcher arm elevated against their ship. They responded correctly. The battery stood down. The water in the strait looks the same today as it did that morning. The tankers move through. The warships transit. The radars track. And somewhere on the rocky promontory near Bandar Elaft, a modified fire control system is building a better targeting solution. Stay vigilant. Stay informed. I'll see you in the next one.